Hello YouTube friends, and for those of you who haven't watched the channel before or don't know me, this is Mess About One. I'm located in northeastern Alabama in the county of Jackson County, Alabama. And I've told some ghost stories on my channel before, and several people seem to enjoy those, and I've had some requests to tell some more about the supernatural. But the story I want to tell you tonight is not a ghost story, but it is a horror story. And what makes this so horrible, the story is true. This happening occurred in April of 1963. That makes it about 48 years ago. It was on April 19th, 1963. And to kind of set the scene, I've mentioned on my channel before that my location here in northeastern Alabama is on the banks of the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River is from eastern Tennessee down through northeastern Alabama, back up into Tennessee, and over into the Mississippi River. Huge river. And back in the 1930s, this river, up until that time, was a wild river. And about 1930, the Tennessee Valley Authority came into this area and wanted to help the area. And one of the ways it could help was to control the river. So TVA built several huge dams from one end of the river to the other to be able to control the river. At that time would flood terribly at times because it was uncontrolled. So they built the dams to control the river. They also built the dams to generate electricity, and they did many other things in this area to improve it. But anyway, when they built the dams, it changed our river from a wild river, which was in most places maybe a quarter-mile wide, to a river that backed up from the dams and formed lakes, big lakes in the backwater around the river. In some areas, the further back you come from the dam, the more river-like it is and the fewer lakes it is. And my town here, called Scottsboro, is about midway between two dams. So we get some effects of the backwater lakes, and we get some effects of the river in the river channel. And the story I'll tell you tonight has to do with that river, and the thing that I will tell you about happened in the river portion instead of the lake portion of the river, the more swiftly flowing part of the river. And my location here where I'm making this video is about a half mile from the banks of the Tennessee River, or from the backwaters of the Tennessee River. But just upriver from the B.B. Comer Bridge, which is here at this town, upriver just a few miles, the river narrows down and it's wild like it once was. It doesn't flow as fast as it once was, but still it's kind of a single channel river in that point. And there's an island there it's a huge island that's on the mountain side of the river. On one side, on this side of the river is the valley side where I am. When you go across the river, it goes up into a plateau or a mountain called Sound Mountain. And this particular part of the river and the island I will talk about was on the mountain side of the river. But due to being a mountain there, the access down to that side of the river is limited. So most of the access is on the valley side, or on this side, my side of the river. So that's where the story will happen. And again, this was 1963. April 19th here would still be just early into spring. The water from cold wintertime temperatures would still be very chilly, cold, matter of fact. Not something you'd want to be in. And so it would have been cold river water at that time. But anyway, there's an island there at this point in the river called Starkey Island. And it's a good-sized island, many acres there of dry land, closer to the mountainside and about a quarter mile from the valley side of the river at that point. But on that island, there was a fish camp. And this being that many years ago, the river and lakes weren't used like they are now. Very few people had boats, but people still enjoyed visiting the river. Some people made their living from fishing from the river. And this is a fish camp that was set up there on that island, and some people ran it and fished trot lines and I guess nets and sold the fish they took from the river. But they also used it as a recreation area for the family. The family that ran this fish camp was the Caves family. One uncle of the Caves ran that fish camp. And it was kind of a tradition for the family to come down. They lived on Sand Mountain. It was kind of a tradition for the family to come down and visit on the island at the fish camp, and they would catch fish and have fish fries and have music and just have a good time, camp out. So, and that had been done for years at this particular camp. So, on this particular day, on April 19th, 1963, the Caves family had planned to come down and go to the fish camp off of Sand Mountain. Their uncle was already on the island, and they, I guess some of the adults had to work, so they got a late start coming down to go to the fish camp that night, and it was after dark when they got there. They had a boat, and back in those days, if you had a boat, most people had to have made or make themselves a homemade wooden boat, flat bottom boat. And these boats were fine for around on the calmer parts of the river. And most people would make them 10 or 12 feet long, and they were fairly stable, but still intended for calmer water. So they had an old boat there by the bank on the valley side of the river, and that was their transportation. They could drive the cars down a long road from the main road to the river and use that boat to paddle across, like it was only a quarter mile, to paddle across to the fish camp. So that was the plans that night, and it was after dark when they got there. In the party that had planned to go over to the fish camp were 3 adults and 7 children. Some of them very young. I think the youngest was about 2 years old, and there were some 5 years old, 7 years old, 11 years old, 14 years old, and then some adults. And there were mostly girls, but some boy children. There was 1 adult man and 2 adult women, along with those 11 people that were going to go across to the river that night, or to the fish camp that night. It's not a problem to paddle a boat like that for maybe a quarter mile, and I'm sure they've done it several times. Probably had done it with no problem several times. But, too, in those days, very few people kept PFDs, or life preservers, in their boat. So I think that was the case this night. They loaded those 3 adults into this boat, and those 7, I guess it was 4 adults and 7 children into that boat, and started out for the fish camp. And everybody was excited about having a good weekend and having a good night, and getting to visit with the rest of the family and having some outdoor fun. And I don't know what the weather was that night. I can't remember hearing. I remember this happening when I was a young man, but I don't remember what the weather was. But it would have been on a moonless night, so it had been very dark. And I'm sure they must have had a lantern or some flashlights with them being at night. And the oldest the boy in the group, or man, would have been the one who probably paddled the rest of them across. The women would have taken care of the children, and this boy, I think he was 17, 18 years old, would have been the captain of the boat, and he would have paddled everybody across. So he got everybody in the boat, and they got settled down, and I'm sure the adults, the 3 adult women, were looking after the 7 children, and the adult man or boy at 18 was going to be the one that paddled them across. So they got started across. Now, there's something I've never heard about on this particular happening, But there are big river barges that go up and down the river too. And I've fished in this area and know what kind of big waves that river barges can kick up. And also the weather around here will change quickly, and it's in kick up some big waves. So sometimes the river is like a mirror, and when the wind gets up or when these barges pass, you can get waves up to several feet, 3 feet maybe, for a big wave on the river. But I don't know the conditions that night. But anyway, they got in the boat, started out, and everything was going fine. And they got about 100 feet from the shore, which is not very far if you think about it. And for whatever reason, some water splashed over in the top of the boat, in the front of the boat. And I suppose there was maybe some children sitting up on the bow, or maybe one of the adult women was up on the bow, and you can imagine 11 people in about a 10, 12-foot boat. And these wooden boats, flat-bottom boats, didn't have a lot of freeboard, but it was pretty well loaded down. But like I said, they'd probably done it before and had no fears of doing it again. But on this particular night, for some reason, and this was told later by the man in the group, that a wave came over the front of the boat. And it scared whoever was sitting there. If it was an adult or children, I don't think it's ever been determined. The man and his older brother were sitting in the back of the boat. Some other children around on the middle seat. Usually these boats had a bow, a middle seat, and a stern seat. But when the wave came over the front of the boat, it scared whoever was there. And the first thought was to get away from the water. And like I say, it would have been cold, ice cold water. It would have gotten your attention. They ran or moved quickly toward the back side of the boat. I'm sure it scared whoever was on the middle seat, and they moved quickly to the back side of the boat. And then the commotion. I don't know if he was standing and paddling or there was so much commotion, but the man was knocked out of the boat, completely out of the boat. And I'm sure his first inclination when he hit that cold water, and being a black night like that, was to swim for shore. And it said he was a strong swimmer, so he started swimming for shore. His little brother, who was about 12 years old and sitting in him in the seat, stayed in the boat. And I suppose the other people in the boat had come to the back, and it started sinking the boat. So there we are, in 100 feet from the edge of the river, with 3 women, 1 man swimming toward the shore, and 7 children screaming and terrified by the cold water. The man that was swimming toward the shore's brother held onto the boat. He was, like I say, about 12 years old, so he clung on to the boat. The boat wouldn't have sunk. It would have swamped, but not completely sunk. It might have turned over with all the commotion. I've never heard that said. But the younger brother held on to the boat. But out of those 11 people, 3 adults and 6 children died that night, drowned in those cold waters on the Tennessee River. The man that swam ashore, and this was a long way from getting help, I'm sure was terrified, didn't know what to do, but somehow he got help to come to the river. When the help got to the river, they must have brought boats, or there was other boats there, and they started searching in the river. And they found the young man, the brother of the man that swam ashore, still clinging to the boat, and they brought him ashore. They looked around, and that night found 2 more that had drowned and brought them to the shore. It wasn't until the next day that they brought in the rescue squad, and any town that has a river and lakes has a rescue squad that are equipped and specializing in recovering bodies that have drowned. So they came in the next day and spent a good part of the day. And this river has enough current that it would have washed bodies downstream, so that made it even more difficult to find the bodies. But they found three more bodies right away, and that totaled up to 7. And then later on in the day, through dragging, they had huge grappling hooks with ropes and lines. They dragged the waters, and they would snag into anything that was floating in the water. And later on that day, they recovered those remaining 4. And it's said that, like I said, they were from Sand Mountain, and there you had 9 drowned out of the 11, and most of them family members. And it said there was a mass grave dug at the cemetery where they would be buried instead of digging individual graves. And they had a mass burial for those. I don't know that all 9 were buried in the mass grave, but the members of this family were buried in that mass grave after this horrible incident. And I wanted to read their names. The people that were on board, the one that swam ashore was Charles Caves. He was 18 years old. His younger brother that clung to the boat was Jeremy Caves, and he was 10 years old. There was a lady on board named Ola Pruitt, and I don't know what relation she was to the Caves. She was 47 years old that drowned. John Caves, 2 years old, drowned. Violet Caves, 34 years old, drowned. Charlotte Caves, 12 years old, drowned. Ola Mae Caves, 15, and she was the wife of the young man that swam ashore. She was 15 years old, and she was Charles Caves' wife. Paula Caves, 8-year-old, drowned. Rebecca June Caves, 5 years old, drowned. Monica Lynn Caves, 4-year-old, drowned. And Billy Caves, 7 years old, drowned. So it's a sad story, and it was covered widely in the news. It's not that often that you would have 9 members of one family drowned in one incident. There was an investigation. I don't think any charges were ever placed. They found that there was nothing unusual other than having too many people in the boat and not having enough life preservers or personal flotation devices. But if you're a person that's around the river or around a lake, remember, no matter what, it's always a good idea to wear your PFD. Probably if all those people had on some kind of life preserver that night, there probably would have been no drownings. And I had a water patrol person tell me one time that he, in his career, had never pulled a drowned person out of the river or out of the lake that had a life preserver on. So that's my horror story. Not a ghost story, but a horror story. And it's true. Good night.